So David Benioff and D.B. Wise, also known as D&D or Dumb and Dumber, have been hired by Disney to do a series of Star Wars movies, a spin-off, and I think it's going to be more than one, according to the article. Now, I have several issues with this. There's so much to unpack here that bothers me about this, and if you're a fan of my channel, you know I'm not a fan of The Last Jedi, that I wasn't big on that movie, and I don't love Force Awakens. I thought the third act of Rogue One was okay, and that's about it. It's not that I'm a Star Wars hater. I definitely like Star Wars, and it's not a Disney thing either, because I like a lot of Disney movies. I just don't like the direction they've taken the franchise, and I think they're making way too many movies for their own good. They're trying to turn Star Wars into Marvel, where you make a movie a year, sometimes two. It feels like they're going to get to the point where they're going to make multiple movies, because we know Rian Johnson is working on a trilogy that's separate from the main saga, and now D&D are working on a separate series, and this doesn't include the spin-off movies they plan to do, and we still have Episode 9 to come out, and then Solo's coming out. So how can you not oversaturate Star Wars at this point? It's what's going to happen. Star Wars works best when it can build hype over a period of time, and I think the evidence is in the box office of Star Wars movies. The Star Wars movies that end up being the most successful are the ones that have a long gap in between. Phantom Menace made $1 billion in 1999 because it was 16 years people had to wait for another Star Wars movie. Force Awakens made $2 billion because to get a sequel, Return of the Jedi, people had to wait even longer, all right? But it's always the sequel film or the third film that doesn't quite have the impact of the initial first one. Now, that's not saying Return of the Jedi and Revenge of the Sith didn't make a lot of money, because they did. But even that, those movies had 3 years in between them. Now we're getting a Han Solo movie this year, and then next year's Episode 9. And then the next year after that, there's going to be another Star Wars movie. And then there's Star Wars TV shows they're going to be doing. So there's going to be so much Star Wars. And here's why it's not Marvel. Kevin Feige and Marvel have comic books that have been around for decades now that they can go pull from and get characters from and build stories around. Now, Disney isn't using the expanded universe, all right? They don't use it much. They'll take little things from it for their projects, but the expanded universe isn't a thing anymore, right? This is a new canon. So they're not giving us new characters. The only new characters are in Rogue One that aren't directly associated with original characters. Now, yes, Darth Vader's in there, Tarkin, Leia. And honestly, Leia, I think you could just cut that whole part out, and that would help that movie. Especially, you could just have it be her back or something. Why did you have to show the CGI face? Oh my god. But there lies the issue, is that the fact that there's not an Ant-Man, there's not a Hulk, there's not a Thor, there's not an Iron Man, there's not a X-Men, there's not a Deadpool, you know, and I'm separating it now, but now Disney owns X-Men and Deadpool, so it counts. But there's all these different characters that have different personalities and different stories. The Star Wars movies, they're relying so much on the franchise and the mythology and what people have what's come before. I mean, think about Rogue One, how much it relies on your knowledge of New Hope, or how much The Force Awakens relies on that, on your nostalgia for that. And in a sense, we're not getting a lot of new characters. Sure, you have Rey, Poe, and Finn, but they're not catching on. Rey, Poe, and Finn aren't iconic like a lot of other modern movie characters right now. They're not as iconic as the Harry Potter trio. They're definitely not as iconic as anyone in Marvel. And you could say, oh, but look how much money the Star Wars movies have made. Yes, but that's the franchise. Look how many Rey toys have sold. Look how much merchandise has sold for Rey. Not a lot. Look how much stuff's selling for Finn. Not that much. These characters, people aren't walking around wearing Rey t-shirts, all right? And you could get mad at me all you want over that and call me sexist, but it's just true. Those characters aren't catching on. Everyone's wearing Captain America stuff now. Everyone's goes and gets Mjolnir from Walmart. Everybody knows who Tony Stark is and you know, loves Iron Man now. I mean, I see people all the time with tattoos of these characters, you know, and I remember back in the day when, God, having a tattoo of a comic book character would have been like made people laugh. Now it's like, oh man, awesome, you got a Spider-Man tat, sweet. And I don't think that works with Star Wars in the same way. I don't think that you can just keep making movies over and over again and they're going to keep being successful. I think that Disney got lucky with the first few, and the first three have made $1 billion, but are they going to be able to continue to make $1 billion or even 700 million? The Last Jedi dropped quite a bit from Force Awakens. Force Awakens almost made $2.1 billion. Last Jedi made $1.3 billion. That's a steep drop, especially at the international box office. Is the interest declining? And will this keep working? I mean, it's weird they're so certain that Solo was going to be a hit. or they're so certain that an Obi-Wan movie or a Boba Fett movie was going to be a hit or something like that. And okay, so that's one of my issues, that I don't think you can just keep coming out with these Star Wars films every year. I think it's going to run out of steam. My second issue with this is D&D suck now. These guys haven't written a good script in forever. It took a long time for people to catch on to the Game of Thrones thing, that what happened. After they ran out of book material, and you can feel the shift around somewhere mid-season 4, even though they were still going off the book at that point, or somewhere around mid-season 4, Game of Thrones started to feel a lot more like a TV show, and a lot less like this great, realistic, gritty, almost medieval show that wasn't that fantastical. It had elements of that, but it didn't overdo it. We only got a little bit of the White Walkers. We only got a little bit of the dragons here and there. It wasn't all the time. But as things went on, Game of Thrones got bigger and bigger and bigger, and season 5, which I think was a really bad season, and then season 6 I think is a really overrated season that has some great spectacle to it, but people overlook tons of bad dialogue and writing. I mean, the Battle of the Bastards is a pretty poorly written episode, but people overlook it because the direction's brilliant, and there's so many beautiful shots and cinematography, and the action scenes are great, but like, logically, there's tons of issues in that. Jon Snow's just an idiot. I mean, I have a Game of Thrones Season 7 review. A lot of people have covered this. I would suggest looking at the channel Preston Jacobs. He does Game of Thrones reviews, and he's a fanatic Song of Ice and Fire reader, but he does a great explanation going back to when the show declined after Season 3, because the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones is one of my absolute favorite shows of all time. At the time, I thought it was going to be my favorite show of all time. I thought those first 3 seasons were tapping into something that reminded me of The Wire or Deadwood or even Mad Men, shows I love. A little bit of The Sopranos, but it had this bigger budget, and it had more special effects. It was like everything I always wanted in a television show, and it definitely had a lot of elements from Dune, that I'm a big fan of Herbert's book. So I was very excited. I loved Game of Thrones. I used to watch it every Sunday. Was an event. The episodes could stand alone thematically and as little pieces of writing, and they didn't always have to connect. Now Game of Thrones is The Last Jedi in a sense. I mean, especially Season 7. Oh my god, Season 7's the season that everyone finally jumped on the bandwagon to turn on the show. Before that, a lot of fans were still giving a pass to D&D's obvious decline in writing. In particular, the dialogue of the show declined. The performances in the show declined. They clearly pick favorites. They love Kit Harington. They love Dany. They love Tyrion. They get rid of characters that are more interesting. They give characters terrible deaths that don't make any sense. Stannis' death is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen on a major television show. And I know there's a lot of spoilers here for Game of Thrones, but if you're not watching Game of Thrones, then sorry, my bad. You're late. You're late to the game. But here's the issue here, man. These guys, they were good writers at one point. In particular, David Benioff, who wrote 25th Hour, the book and the movie. Very good script. And they wrote the Chaos is a Ladder speech that Littlefinger gives in Game of Thrones Season 3, which is a great season of television. I think Season 3 is a wonderful piece of work. But even so, most of the best things about Game of Thrones, the characters, the plot, the setting, the world building, all came from Martin. Very little of that came from those two. Now, that's not knocking them, but I think their arrogance has grown throughout the years, and their boredom with the show. It felt like they wanted to go do that Confederate show, and they didn't want to do Game of Thrones anymore. In particular, you feel that with the last 2 seasons, because they're just trying to wrap everything up. That's why we have these terrible time jumps, where the geography doesn't make any sense anymore. And even when you try to match it up in the timelines, like, okay, this person was here during this, and this person was here than this, it doesn't make sense. You'll find tons of holes in it, where it's like, wait, it's impossible that they could have gotten over to this part of the map while this person is here. It's legit impossible knowing the distance, because we see the map in the beginning. And the great thing about Game of Thrones, it used to be 2 people walking down roads and talking and character development, and it felt like it took forever to get somewhere. It felt real. It reminded me so much of Lost, how the island used to feel big, and then in the last season they're just walking back and forth on the island like it's 5 minutes. And the whole show used to be how big the island was and how long it would take you to get to certain points in it. Same thing starts out with Game of Thrones. It doesn't matter anymore. It's Jon and his fellowship are teamed up, and they're here because they need to be here. Dany shows up because she needs to show up. Everything's so convenient now, and so we can give you what you want. It's pure fan service. It's poorly written. It's just poorly written. There's some decent moments here and there. Jamie Lannister's still kind of interesting. There's that great scene with Cersei where she's torturing the people from Dorne. There's still good moments. You know, Euron was fun in Season 7, but overall, it's a mess. And everyone finally noticed that this season. It took a while for people to fully catch on that D&D are turning into hacks, and they don't care. It's laziness. There was so much plot to tell. There was so much story left to tell. And they just tried to wrap it up so conveniently because they're like, well, we don't have the books anymore, so let's just give people what they want, and we'll have the good guy versus the bad guy. Kit Harington's going to have a boss battle with the Night King. So silly. So silly. Characters just make the dumbest decisions anymore in that show. I'm still somewhat excited about season 8 because some of the deaths are going to be emotional. But man, season 7, that was one of the worst experiences for me week by week, excluding the dragon episode where the dragon burned everyone, the Matt Shackman episode where Jaime and Bronn fight Drogon. That's the one episode that I think is really good overall. And the Queen's Justice is pretty decent. These guys, man, I think this is a horrible choice. They were guys who should have brought in other writers to their show, a lot bigger of a writer staff. Even Brian Cogman, who writes on that show, I think does a better job than they do when he writes specific episodes. And them coming into this, I think this is an insane idea. Now, I guess this is them canceling that Confederate show because as soon as they announced that show, everyone went crazy online, like social media and everywhere, that it was the most racist premise for a show ever. So I figured that was going to get canceled. HBO was not going to go forward with that controversy, even though HBO back in the day didn't give a damn what people said about them. I mean, this is the network that gave us Oz, which has like male rape in every episode. So yeah, not only am I against this because I think it's too many Star Wars movies, I think David and Dan aren't that great. This quote from Lucasfilm, David and Dan are some of the best storytellers working today. They are not some of the best storytellers working today. There's no proof of this. Their command of complex characters, depth of story, and richness of mythology will break new ground and boldly push Star Wars in ways I find incredibly exciting. Well, also Kathleen Kennedy, she's terrible at this. She's not Kevin Feige. She cannot produce multiple films at the same time. She's showing this. That's why we're getting a lot of reshoots and firings. Benioff and Weiss are this overpraise of their genius. They've won the Emmy a few times and all that. No, Game of Thrones, so much of that's George Martin. So much of what people love about it, like Ned Stark and the Red Wedding and the way it's revealed, that's all George Martin. Why didn't you hire him to write a Star Wars movie? So you get these two guys, and I think they've just fallen apart. They especially don't care about Game of Thrones anymore. Now, you could say, the earlier seasons that are well written, maybe it could return to that. Maybe they'll come back and they'll write good again like they did the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones. That's a good point. Sure. But you think Disney's going to make Game of Thrones? Because I already felt Rian Johnson was trying to do Game of Thrones with Last Jedi with subversion and deconstruction. And I thought it failed miserably. So I don't want to see these guys come and do it and fail even worse. Like, that's my big fear. Game of Thrones is now in production on its final season with 6 supersized episodes in the works, aiming for a 2019 run to wrap its run. Work is also underway of 5 proposed Game of Thrones prequels of the Emmy-winning fantasy series. So now, Game of Thrones spin-offs make more sense because of how dense the universe is from years and the show. And you could probably do, I don't think they should do 5. I think you should probably do 1 show that's a spin-off of Game of Thrones. I don't know why they're trying to make multiple shows. Is HBO just going to be Game of Thrones? You know you have other shows. I know Westworld hasn't caught on totally like Game of Thrones did, but Jesus. Like the Johnson trilogy announced in November, no release dates have been set for the new films. The next movie in the Star Wars franchise is the second standalone pick, Solo, a Star Wars story, directed by Ron Howard. On Disney's first quarter earnings call after the Benioff and Weiss news went public, Chairman and CEO Bob Iger was asked why the pair weren't doing a Star Wars-centered series like the one being developed for Disney's new... Yeah, that's the thing. So now they're also doing a television show that Disney's developing. Their interest was in creating Star Wars films. We've been talking with them for some time. They didn't express interest in a series. He added that the pair was focused on a particular point in time in the Star Wars franchise. And that's the thing, they weren't very good showrunners on Game of Thrones or producers. You can actually do some research on this. Even Battle of the Bastards, the director told them on that he could not shoot with the horses in the days that they gave him. And eventually they had to cut a lot of stuff, and that's why there's some continuity errors and some stuff like that in the Battle of the Bastards. There's a lot of things like that because they don't prep these things well. They try to shoot in locations you can't shoot at. This also happened with Dorne in season 5 when Bronn and Jaime have that fight in the garden. They wanted to shoot that at this place that they couldn't do anything at, and it didn't work. and they weren't even allowed to shoot inside of it. They had to shoot outside of it, and it screwed everything up. They didn't have enough time to do the scene. Instead of D&D going somewhere where they could have taken the production and got it done and got the action scene done well. Instead, they always want to take it to these locations. Like, we want to shoot it here, and they're like, well, you can't shoot it here. And they do that stuff throughout the whole show. This whole show has suffered from that. The big reason that it still looks great and a lot of it works is that it's $100 million they get now. Now, that's not knocking them as producers. I think they do a great job with casting, with who they get to work on the costumes, the action scenes, everything like that, the cinematography, all the technical stuff of Game of Thrones is great. Some of the best in television history, maybe the best. But they actually don't handle time well. This might be why they want to make a movie. They had a lot of time issues with the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, and they'll even talk about this, that they're being overwhelmed having to produce these huge episodes in 6 months, because it's just a lot of stuff to do. You got to do these big hour-long epic episodes with a lot of money. I mean, we're talking big-budget episodes of television, and you have to do multiple ones while the show is being made over months, and then you have to prep the next season. That's why they're not coming out the next season until 2019. But the problem is, if they spend all this time and then you watch season 7, you could see how it's caught up to them. So I think a big reason they want to do movies is because they can prep them. They can take time in between each movie to prep the next one, because they don't want to get stuck in that situation again where they start doing a show for a few years and then the show gets so big they can't keep control of it anymore. They've just lost, and then they run out of book material and they're like, we don't know what to do. And it really, I mean, and you could see this in the show, but D&D, whenever they talk in the post interviews, it's ridiculous. They give the worst simplistic answers you could possibly give to some of the most interesting things. And now they treated Littlefinger. There's so many things they screwed up. But I guess you can't screw up Star Wars anymore. But this is weird to me, because this is like Disney going out under HBO, buying their two big guys, putting them with them. It's like the Yankees buying all the good players thing in baseball. And now Disney has all this power. They own Fox, and now they have these guys. Although I think they think these guys are a bigger name than the product. Like, I think they think that if they put their names on a Star Wars movie, people are going to be like, oh man, the Game of Thrones guys are doing Star Wars? Hell yeah. But I think they don't realize the Game of Thrones is a property in itself that's successful. I don't know if it'll translate over to Star Wars. Now, they said that they had a specific story, a particular point in time in the franchise they want to tell, that they want to explore in the movies. I don't know what this timeline is. I don't know if this is the Knights of the Old Republic thing. I don't know what time in Star Wars they want to tell, but this is why I think they want to get a TV show. I think when they were planning Confederate, that was almost a way to take away from the Game of Thrones thing so they can kind of just start moving on to something else, and that just backfired so bad. So now D&D are like, okay, we'll go do Star Wars, because that's going to make money. Instead of going to write and direct something original, they just jump on another franchise, which is fine. I'm not knocking them, but oh my god, could you write another 25th Hour, man? Can we get another one of those? It's one of Spike Lee's best movies. So yeah, to just summarize, too many Star Wars movies coming out. D&D have not shown themselves to be great storytellers over the last several years. And we're going back to Season 5 and the end of Season 4. They've been inconsistent. That they were poor with time management. They made a lot of mistakes as showrunners. It shows in the product and the final product. The show feels rushed anymore. They're rushing through the story. And now they're going to do a series of new Star Wars films. Rian Johnson's doing a series of Star Wars films. Are they going to interconnect? I mean, what the hell is this? I'm excited that maybe we'll actually get some new characters and we won't have to rely so much on Luke Skywalker, Leia, and that. One of my biggest issues with the new films is that they're sequels, so they're so associated with the original trilogy and such that you can't just view them as their own movies, kind of. So this might be a good thing in the long run, but as an immediate decision, I think it looks good on paper, but for the long term, I think this is another mistake Kathleen Kennedy's going to make, and one of several mistakes she's made since she's taken over the Star Wars franchise. So that's just my opinion. You guys can give your own in the comment section. Like and subscribe, and please rewind your VHS tapes before you bring them back to the store. Thank you.